What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? You're probably wondering why I'm not at the welding table, and that's because I have a special treat for you guys, and that is a repair video. So I'm in the process of editing a video on the top 10 dumbest mistakes I've made in my history of welding and fabricating, and one of them on the list was so good that I thought it deserved its own video, so that's kind of what we're doing here. In case you're wondering why we're staring at the back of a Vector truck, that's because this video is about a stupid mistake I made repairing one of these. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So this mistake that I made has to do with a Vector truck repair. Now the truck in the picture is actually a lot smaller than the truck I had to do the repair on, but the latching system that you can see there to hold the door shut on the rear, so sewage or whatever you sucked up doesn't leak all over the highway. Well, the latch system is somewhat similar. So what happened was the lower block that pin on the left side slides into to put pressure to hold the door shut, that block was bent out of the way, like basically the pin had pried it over or something had pushed it, broke it, and the weld was cracked, and there was a bunch of issues, and that's how it came to me, and I was just told to fix it. Well, the number one thing that I always do when I have something that's broken is I try and figure out why it's broken, because things don't generally just break on their own. There's generally something else wrong. And that's probably the biggest mistake that any welder or future welder or fabricator makes when repairing stuff, is simply not figuring out why it failed in the first place. Because if you don't do that, your work won't last either. So let's take a look at what broke. So here's that block, and it's actually bent over quite a bit, and the weld is cracked. Now I knew something was wrong because this is, well, for one, thick steel, and two, what on earth could have broke this from the door? It just didn't make sense to me. So my first thought was the pins that locate into that slot, that they were rotating, and essentially rather than the tapered part of the pin hitting the tapered part of that bar there, that black bar, it was hitting sideways, which pried it over. Now the pin and locking system uses an air cylinder, and I don't know that it really has that much force that it could do this. So something just didn't seem right about this as to what happened. So anyways, I opened the door up, and by the way, I couldn't actually latch the door before because the pin would hit that, and it was just a kind of a problem. Well, anyways, I opened the door up, and I got to arc gouging that crack out completely and making it ready to be welded. So here it is, all arc gouged out. It's almost paper thin there at the crack. I used a die grinder after this picture just to clean it up a little bit, but arc gouging leaves a pretty clean surface finish, so that's a plus. Now I was unsure as to how much this block actually was bent out of the way, but I put a square on this one and the three other blocks, because this one had 4 locking pins, to get an idea, and this appeared to be bent pretty significantly. Here you can see in this photo that square is resting flat on the back, and you can see how much of a bend that sucker has. Not good. All 3 other blocks were more or less square. Now this is sitting on the edge of the weld, but even with that you can see that they're pretty much square. So I made the decision to use a porta-power and jack the one that's bent with the broken weld to more or less get it closer to square. Now when the door was shut but not latched, there was quite a decent gap underneath the door, so I figured, well, all of them were made square and I'll just bring it back to square. So as you can see, it is now square, and I let it rest once I took the pressure off a little bit over 90 degrees. That way when I fully welded it, it would be brought back to 90 degrees. So here's the first pass or two on it, and I started filling this thing up. Now what's weird to me is that about this time I had a little bit of a tickle in my pickle per se, where something just didn't seem right, and I kept telling myself, hey, before I go and weld this like an idiot, maybe I should shut the door now that that block isn't bent out of the way and check everything. If you ever get that spider sense, the welder sense, make sure you check things because it's pretty hard to remove welds and it's time consuming. So always check things, especially if you think that something isn't going to fit or isn't going to work right. Now, before I even started this repair, I noticed that these clevises had a ton of play, like rotation on the pin that they're on, like the hole is far too big. So what I ended up doing was shoving a washer or two underneath them to prevent that clevis from rotating and thus the pin wouldn't rotate. Because at this point I was thinking that the pin rotating with a flat spot would essentially end up hitting that block rather than feeding into it. So I thought that that was the main culprit, but as we're going to find, I was mistaken. So here we go, a couple pass weld on it. It's reasonably square. Everything looks good. Hit it with a coat of primer, and I thought that the job was done. So I went in the truck, fired it up, got the air pressure going, and tried to shut the door and realized that the damn door hit this block because there wasn't enough clearance, which is exactly what that tickle in my pickle was telling me would happen that I ignored. So, oh shit, what do I do now? So this is photographic evidence that a great job is worth doing twice. And this is actually the first time I arc gouged it, but guess what? I had to arc gouge that weld I just put down out and redo it. And at this point, I'm like, how in the hell did I make this mistake? And well, there were a couple things. One, 3 of the 4 blocks are square to the face. This one, which of course is the one that broke, actually needed to be almost where it was to begin with. So it needed to be far out of square. That's not something I would have suspected and is kind of BS. And I'll say that it's not my fault that I missed this, but it is because I should have checked the actual clearance in the back with the door to start with to get a better idea how much I needed to move it. I made an assumption that they're all square because 3 of them were, and they simply weren't. The second mistake I made was assuming that the pins rotating is why they struck this particular block. Now, I don't regret putting washers in it because I do believe it had too much rotational play, too much slop, and that could have contributed to the problem, but let me show you what else I found. Here is the locking pin for the side that the block was broke on, and this is in the retracted position. In the retracted position, this appeared to be close to where the other ones were, but in the extended position, this one was way far past the other ones. So as you can see, it shoots straight through that block. Now, I have this not even tightened down just to see how far it ends up, but that flat spot that's supposed to pry against the tapered end of that black block there, guess what? This one way overshoots it. The 3 other ones stop where that pin is basically flush with the bottom side of that black block there. So I recognize that this might be at least a contributing factor, if not the reason why that block broke, was that the pin is simply extending too far. On this side, and this is the same as the other 2 that weren't broken, the pin's basically flush on the bottom. So you can see that they're not over traveling, which I find this strange because these pins are all on threaded clevises and they can't really change in length over time. So the only thing I can think is that some idiot, no offense to anyone, set that one pin to where it was just overextended and never caught it. And I'm not really sure how that would have happened because this isn't something that really wears and needs adjustment. And you can see how much clearance is between that block and the door, and that block is square off the face, as are the other ones. So I'm not exactly sure how the one that was broke had 0 clearance when it was square. Clearly it was welded crooked to begin with. Weird. So I ended up pulling a pin on that one that's facing downward and then spinning the clevis on the rod in order to shorten it. I must have taken 1.5 inches out of it to where now that locking pin matches all 3 other ones. At this point, I also checked if the whole door assembly didn't somehow drop for some reason, and that was why. But I couldn't find any excessive play or that anything moved. So again, I think it was just welded crooked to begin with. And this is basically what the job looked like when I was done, but I didn't take a picture of the second time around, but basically the same as this. Now, I did do even more investigation to kind of come up with other reasons why this might have happened, and I found some interesting things. So right behind this block is more or less a gusset to the drum, and the gusset was broke. So I don't really know for sure what happened, but there's no way that that pneumatic cylinder had enough torque to bend all this, break that weld, and crack the gusset in the back. So I think what happened was this black block or the area directly under it hit something, as in the truck was backed into something, and it ended up breaking the block and the gusset behind it, because like I said, there's no way that that pneumatic cylinder has enough torque to do that. So I believe that it was an accident of some sort that caused this, and at the very least, it was a start of what happened, and then the pin might have bent it a little bit more. But it goes to show that even on a simple job like this, where I thought it was money in the bank, done in, about an hour and 15 minutes and everything's good, can turn into a far more complicated wormhole that you don't want to be in. So what did I learn from doing this job? It definitely pays to spend just a little bit more time to figure out what the hell is going on, because I thought everything was fine. I had figured it out, but I overlooked a lot of things, and that's what cost me. And rather than being done in an hour and a half, it ended up taking me 4 or 5 hours to finish this job, just because of my own stupidity on looking at the big picture, I guess. And I also learned not to doubt my pickle sense per se, because anytime I get that, I'm telling you, I know that something's going to hit, and if there's doubt, there is no doubt. It's going to hit, it's not going to fit, so double check things, and never assume that something that's made that has 4, 5, 10, 100 parts, doesn't matter. If all of them are square, doesn't mean that the one you're working on should be or is. With that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video, had a laugh, and learned from my mistake. Until next time.